Alright, so today's video is going to be a little bit different than normal. There's going to be just some random gameplay in the background, and I'm simply going to be talking. Obviously you saw the title and thumbnail, so the only thing that I'm going to say before I get into it is that I'm not taking anyone's side here. I'm not here trying to voice the complaints of the community, because the community honestly complains about some stupid things. And I'm going to talk about a couple issues that the community voices that are actually not issues, and why I believe so. What I'm trying to do here is just be a voice of reason, right? If it's bad for the game, if I believe that it's bad for the game, then I'm going to voice that and kind of give my reasoning for what the issues are, not necessarily what the most popular complaints are. So yeah, just getting that out of the way. Okay, so the first big issue is probably the most obvious one, and this is one that everybody will agree on, and that would be the Acoin gain. It's so hard to get that resource, and it's such a necessity, especially when you progress to like tier 6. I think pretty much everything besides Brickhouse and possibly Graviton 10 if it's in tier 7. I don't know. But yeah, tier 7, I think everything besides Brickhouse costs Acoins, and costs a lot of Acoins too. So it's like after that, there's no buying anything with credits. It's just you have copious amounts of Acoins or you don't, and it really limits the number of players who are able to access those higher tiers. Now obviously it's not supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to be like, well, I've been playing for 3 months, I don't know why I'm not in tier 8 yet. Like obviously you're not gonna have a max hanger that quickly unless you spend money. Like, I'm sorry, but the truth is as a free-to-play, there's no reasonable way that you could get to tier 8 pretty much ever the way that it is right now. And that's not okay to me. Now, the way that they have the tiers set up is to try to bunch players together in tiers 5 and 6. And they've done this effectively. This is purposeful, by the way. They make it significantly harder to get to tier 7 on purpose. They do that so that the larger portion of players are kind of condensed into like the mid game, and everybody has fairly similar stuff while they're all, you know, at different stages of saving for different items in tier 7, or even own a couple items in tier 7, but all of their hangers are relatively even. And that's a good idea. However, bunching players together and like stalling them at mid game is fine, but I don't think hard locking free-to-play players from ever reaching tier 8 reasonably, or just endgame, just period, is absurd. Like, that's basically what they've done, and everybody kind of knows that at this point. Before the gear hub, yeah, it was possible, and I knew a few people who were in what I would consider to be endgame hangers, and they were free to play, and so, you know, right, that's fine. But now with the gear hub, the progression system's changed. It's so much more expensive, and I can't say that anymore. Like, I can't say that anymore. So I think that is a obvious issue that needs to be addressed, and it's simply because you can't get enough Acoins from anything. There's far too few ways to get them. And that is a perfect transition into point number 2, which would be the tournament mode, which is terrible. It's awful. I don't know if anyone actually plays that out of enjoyment. Some people might play free-for-all because they enjoy free-for-all, but like, come on. If you could play free-for-all normally, you would probably do that and get multiple different maps rather than playing the same map for like 30 times in a row. It's horribly boring. I don't think anyone actually enjoys it. It's full of tankers, and again, because of the previous Acoin problem that I mentioned, it means that tournament being the only way to reasonably get large amounts of A coins, like pretty much period, that means that any issues, any loopholes, any exploits in tournament are magnified by like 100 times. And you see that with tanking. People who are tanking, it's now the only way to win. Everybody's tanking. Everybody's doing it because that they see that as the only way to win anything. And it has become the truth. I mean, it wasn't before, but now it kind of is. You know, if you want to win a tournament, you got to tank. I'm going to call you a no-skill loser, but that is the truth, unfortunately. And there's not a whole lot I can say against that. So point number 3 is a little bit different. It's on the topic of item imbalances. Now, I want to first point out that I have believed, and I continue to believe, that they have done a great job balancing their mechs in this game. Fantastic job. Every mech has its pros and cons, it has counters, it has lots of different things going for it, several things going against it. There's a lot of different things that you can use. Now, some perform really bad, and I wish that they would buff some, and I wish that they would nerf some. But ultimately, I'm not even going to touch on the topic of mech imbalance. I'm simply going to talk about weapons. The imbalance, the meta in weapons is basically just camper weapons and anti-camper weapons. There's no in between. Like, there's no place for assault, there's no place for beams, there's no place for missiles. Well, I mean, Stormrack has made missiles slightly more popular, but even still, typically, a camper or anti-camper weapon would outperform that. And by camper, I mean like Helix Rag snipers, or like Rocket Mortar, right? And then anti-camper would just be also Rocket Mortar, but also Disc Launcher and anything with like large radius, something like that. And so, close range weapons have fallen off a lot. You can make them work. There's a lot of things that you can make work, right? But ultimately, if you see like a top meta hanger, it's got 2 EM rifle builds and 3 disc launcher builds, and that's it. And that's just the way to do it. Or maybe they want to mix it up and they go with like 2 EM rifle builds or railgun build, and then 2 disc launcher builds. But it's either sniper or disc launcher. That's what I'm saying. And it boils down to just like the snipers being the big heavy hitters, the main weapons, the big problem, and then just the one weapon being the anti-sniper weapon, which is disc launcher. And both of those are just, you can't nerf one without the other one fully dominating. So what needs to happen is that they really need to nerf the damage from railgun. Right? They need to force players to use a larger number of shots to get kills with railgun because it has multiple shots. EM rifle is a different issue. Personally, I think that it needs to do significantly less damage up close. Should it one-shot things? Honestly, I think yes, because if it's only got one shot, and other things are already doing stupid amounts of damage, you may as well allow it to one-shot, otherwise it's kind of useless. So, in my mind, the best way to balance that would either be, well, I would say to increase the reload time, number 1, to like 6 seconds at least. I think currently it's 5.5, so maybe 6.5, increase it by like a second. But then also reduce the damage that it deals point blank. I think currently it deals like 60-70% of its full damage at point blank range, which is terrible. Like, how are you one-shotting something at point blank with a sniper that's supposed to deal significantly less damage? Like, it's not supposed to be a brawler weapon. Like, how is EM rifle a better close range weapon than my close range weapons are, right? That doesn't make any sense. It shouldn't be like that, but it is. And so that needs to happen. And then, of course, Disc Launcher is its own demon. Personally, I think that the damage is really the only thing that needs to be reduced. maybe increase the reload time as well. But the thing is like when you look at the stats, it looks fine. The damage per shot is low, but the entire thing breaks and the entire thing goes to crap as soon as you factor in the back damage multiplier, which is almost guaranteed with something with a radius the size of the sun. And so if you're not going to reduce the radius, which you could, but I think there should be a weapon with a large radius, and it may as well be Disc Launcher, it shouldn't be hitting like an actual truck. Like, it shouldn't be two-shotting things, right? So I think the point of Disc Launcher, the point of the anti-camper weapons just in general, would be to deal damage where other weapons can't, to draw enemies out, to force them to move into the fire of the high DPS weapons, right? Not for the anti-campers themselves to be the high DPS weapons. That's just, that is crossing the line, and that's creating a world and a game where, you know, the assault weapons just don't have value. Which, there's a lot of other reasons assault weapons don't have value, and that's because burst damage is, like, the only way to get good results, especially against players who actually know what they're doing. So, personally, I think assault weapons just need to have their damage, like, really mega buffed. Like by a lot. Because it's the only thing I can really think of, right? Because you don't really want to make them burst damage weapons. They're assault weapons, right? It's supposed to be like a, you know, over damage over time. You have lots of damage, but it takes you a little while to do it. But you should at least, like, actually get that damage. I'm pretty sure Graviton Beam has better damage, better range, better mag size, better reload time. It has Graviton Beam's pretty much better in every conceivable way than Carbine. And that's, like, why is that, right? I don't understand. So, obviously, there should be some type of buff to assault weapons just in general. Moving on to the next point, that would be the speed meta. Now, everyone who's running around in their, like, hangar full of, like, 3 to 4 scouts probably is going to want to disagree with this, but you can't legitimately, like, consider what I'm saying and then actually discard it as being like, well, no, I'm just really good with scouts. Like, I'm sorry, but fast things are objectively easier to handle. If you put yourself in a bad spot and someone starts coming after you, guess what? You can just move to the other side of the map in a matter of seconds, as opposed to actually living with the consequences of your bad positioning skills. Honestly, is what it comes down to. And the mechs that are slow suffer a lot, and the mechs that are fast are just absurd. But part of it is the fact that most scouts, most high-speed mechs have very, very high energy capacity. 24 energy can, like, you can do so much damage with that, especially with the weapon imbalance that I mentioned previously. With a double EM12 Eclipse, not only can you cross the map in a couple seconds, you can also one-shot anything that you come across at point-blank range. And although they've done a nice job balancing a lot of mechs in a lot of different situations, specifically for Control Point Clash, which I'm assuming is the main mode for most players. It's the main mode for me. It's the one that I have the most fun with. It's the one that I play the most. It's absolutely necessary that you have multiple fast mechs. Now, obviously, that's kind of a given, right? You should want to build, you should be encouraged to build a balanced hangar, right? If you had a bunch of scouts, then you should be encouraged to be putting in a tank to absorb some damage. You should be encouraged to put in, like, a DPS attacker mech or a support, something like that. Supports are kind of their own thing, but you get my point. And they do largely encourage that, but gets to a point where scouts are just so all-powerful. Gets to a point where, especially in CPC, if you had a full hangar of scouts, you're golden. Like, you're fine. You're gonna win matches easily. Like, there's almost no drawback to it. Even though there's more HP, more tanks entering the meta all the time, that meta is mostly for like 5v5 and 2v2. Like, if you just run around and capture beacons, what are they even gonna do? They can't really do anything about it, because those mechs, even though they're very meta, they have inherent balances, which is like their speed, right? They're not fast, they're not able to keep up. But you couldn't run 5 slow mechs, right? You could run 5 fast mechs and you'll do fine. Maybe you'll lose a couple matches. But you couldn't run 5 slow mechs. You'd lose instantly. Like, there'd be no chance for you. And so I think just the clear speed meta, which is probably prevalent in most games, it's an annoyance for myself, personally. I'm not sure how anyone else feels about it. Let me know if you think that the speed meta is worse than I'm talking about, or if you agree with me, or if you think that maybe it's not as bad as I'm making it out to be. I do like a lot of mechs that tend to be slower, so maybe it is just personal opinion here. So the last big issue is going to be the AI behavior, the bots. Not everything about the AI is terrible and awful. However, over the past like year or so, bots have received lots of updates to their behavior, to the items that they have, and all that sort of thing. And so now, instead of, you know, really weak bots with incredibly terrible, like, mech and weapon pairings like we used to get before the Crate update, now we get significantly stronger bots, right? And you'll have ones that are actually fully maxed out. That's what I fight. Now, the first big issue, I would say, is that bots constantly have access to things that you don't have access to in the tier that you're in, which is ridiculous. Now, obviously, sometimes that might happen, but I don't think it should be a norm, necessarily, for them to constantly be significantly more powerful than you. Always have, like, max legendary implants, like a full pilot of max legendary implants. Like, how many players actually have that? I don't even have that on almost any. I have that on, like, maybe 2 pilots, and I've been playing this game for forever. But then they also have higher tier stuff than you, right? So it's not even just the level. It's like when you're in tier 6, let's say, and you got like a rank 4 epic something. You got like your rank 4 kill shot, right? And then they have stuff from tier 5. They have, like, I think brick houses in tier 5. They've got like a rank 4 brick house. It's like, where did they get that? I don't understand. Like, this is a bot. Did the bot buy an offer from Plarium for a 3-star, 2-star brick house and then upgrade it to rank 4? Like, if you're not going to give them a 5-star mech, then give them a 4-star mech. Give them an epic. Like, why are you giving them a legendary but then lower than the grade that you can actually get it at? Like, I believe that bots should never have items that are lower rank than, like, what they are when you get them naturally in the gear hub, period. I don't think you should ever see a 4-star legendary something on a bot. But the reality is that you see that all the time. It's very common, and I don't really know why that happens. I don't know why there's a need to do that. You know, if you want to make the bot stronger, you give them rank 5 epic stuff. You know, if you don't want to throw legendaries at someone, you could give them rank 5 epics or rank 5 legendaries. But, you know, if you're going to give them rank 4s, give them epics. Why are you giving them legendaries? Personally, that just doesn't make sense to me. But then, more than that, after all of these updates that bots have received, they still focus on the player. They still hard focus the player over anyone else in the entire match. If there's a bot standing 2 meters away from them, literally in their face, they will sidestep that enemy bot so that they can snipe you from across the map, or even just like fire something that's like, even if it's never gonna hit you. Like it would be like the worst idea possible, like a pulse cannon. But it still tries because it has this bias. It has this need to focus down the player over anyone else, and I think that's totally unfair, since like the whole point of all of these updates to bot behavior and bot equipment was to make them more akin to regular players. Like, don't make them focus the player on top of that. That's just absurd. All right, so now I want to talk about some of the things that I don't believe are issues but I still see them come up very often. Now, still on the topic of bots, still, one that I see a lot is the bots having like a, quote, team bias, where they will purposely throw the game for you, or they will purposely do better. The bots on the enemy team are doing way better than the bots on my team. So that's the complaint that I constantly hear. And yeah, that's probably true, but it's not purposeful. It's random. The bots are random. If you were to flip a coin 4 times, sometimes it's going to land all 4 times on heads. Sometimes. It's not going to happen every time, but sometimes it happens. Sometimes it's going to land all 4 times on tails. You're not necessarily going to notice. In fact, I can pretty much guarantee that almost no players actually notice or pay attention to when the bots are favoring their team. I try my best to make sure that I notice when that happens, but, you know, sometimes I won't either. Because we expect to win, right? We expect to be victorious, and in a fair match, we assume that we would probably best the other guy. Even though you might win against someone in a 1v1, like, you're not playing a 1v1. If that's all you wanted, then 1v1 this person, or play 2v2s, or something like that. I don't care. But the whole thing about CPC or any of these other team matches is that you have a team. Now, sometimes your bots are going to be really annoying to try to manage, but that's just part of the game. They are genuinely, though, random, and they are not ever, I will repeat, they are not ever strictly biased against you. Now, you might say, well, when I start winning a bunch of games, then I always get this one game where the bots are against me, and I end up losing. It's like, well, that's just what happens. If you get a bunch of times where the coin doesn't land all 4 heads in a row, if you keep doing it, eventually it will. And that's the one thing that you're just like hyper focusing on that one thing. So what I'm trying to say is, like, it is just random. And that's just the way, that's just the nature of randomness. And the last thing that I want to mention that is a non-issue is one that probably a lot of people were expecting to hear was an issue, because it's such a common complaint. And so many people are going to think, wait, is this guy serious? As soon as I tell you what it is. But just hear me out, okay? That's all I want. Just hear me out. Matchmaking is not a problem. The matchmaking in Mech Arena is fine. The key difference between your perception of matchmaking and the matchmaking that you're actually getting is that matchmaking is not SP-based. You think that it is, and maybe at one point it was. I thought that it was for the longest time too, but eventually, at one point, one of the official moderators, like one of the moderators in Mech Arena Official, told me, from having this knowledge directly from Plarium, that matchmaking is not strictly SP-based. It is a skill-based matchmaking. And after observing everything that I thought was wrong about matchmaking after that, and taking that viewpoint into consideration, honestly, everything kind of just made more sense. It all made more sense. Every time I see someone talking about unfair matchmaking versus players, every time I hear that, almost, I would say more than half the time, the player who's complaining won the match. And so they had the skill advantage, while the other guy had the equipment advantage. And you can say one is better than the other, but I mean, like an amount of skill will counteract an amount of item advantage. It will. And so I would say more than half the time when I have this conversation with people, they are the victors in this situation, in this scenario, where they were supposedly, you know, shafted by matchmaking. Oh, but then, you know, and you hear all of these other all these other cases every single time. You watching this right now, I don't know what SP you are. Maybe you're like 5,000 and you beat someone who's like 8,000. I'm sorry, and I don't want to tell you that you're bad. I'm not going to tell you that you're bad. However, that happens to everyone. That doesn't mean that you're a pro player. That means that matchmaking saw you. They said, yeah, you can deal with this guy who spent probably like 200 bucks buying a bunch of stuff. He's naturally at like 4,000, but he bought his way up to 8,000. And now I'm going to pit him with his lower experience against you with your worse stuff but higher experience, right? Basically take it as a compliment for matchmaking and try your best. If you ever see something where it's like it looks like the match is super unfair, try your best, because almost every time matchmaking knows exactly what it's doing. And no, you're not going to win every single match. It would be absurd for you to win every single match. It's not like you're the greatest player to ever happen to the game. But something to consider is that matchmaking is, I mean, it's a balance between SP and skill-based. Obviously, there is an amount of SP-basedness that exists in it, because you can't just, like, throw a 12k up against a 3k. That doesn't happen. But you see all these instances, and you've probably experienced a lot of these instances where you fight people that are either way higher or way lower than you, and that is almost always going to be the case of the skill-based matchmaking. And so that's just something to consider. I'm going to get a lot of I'm gonna get a lot of angry counterpoints on this, I think. But that is ultimately the way that it is. I mean, contrary to the speed meta problem that I mentioned before, matchmaking is not really an opinion of mine. It is a fact that matchmaking is skill-based. So, regardless of what you think or what I think, it is important to keep in mind that, like, that is the way that it is. Whether you like it or not, whether you think it should be that way or not, that is the way that it is. And I think that it's fine. And I personally, when considering skill-based matchmaking, I have come across excessively few actual issues with matchmaking. Even not personally, obviously. Personally, I'm not going to come across a bunch, but I mean from other people sharing their experiences, sharing screenshots of what happened to them, sharing all these things. It's almost always a lot more fair than you think. And so I'm going to leave it off with that, because I think honestly it's comforting to know that the game doesn't just account for your squad power, it does value your skill, and it shows how much it values your skill by what kind of opponents that it puts you against. And so anytime you fight someone who's significantly stronger than you, win or lose, you can rest assured knowing that matchmaking rightfully and genuinely believed that you had a good 50-50 shot at beating that guy. With the exception of, like, tanking and stuff, which is basically just a loophole exploit of matchmaking as a whole, but that's right, it's not the same thing. But yeah, with that, that is going to be it for me. Appreciate y'all. Take care.